So, I'm super excited about today's first episode in my new weekly series, Dating After a Toxic Relationship. Um, Over the past few weeks or so, when I've been thinking about doing this, I was thinking, what are the important things that people need to know after you've been in something so toxic and so abusive and feeling like you're ready to date again? So, this series I'm so excited to do because dating after a toxic relationship and what that really looks like is something we don't talk about. We don't talk about healing as much as we should. We don't talk about recovery as much as we should. For me, that is more of my platform than anything. I could sit here all day and talk about how horrible it was to be in that toxic relationship, and so many people would relate, but where would we really go if all we did was talk about the abuse and talk about how horrible the person was? We really wouldn't get very far, would we? So for me, I enjoy talking about the recovery. I enjoy talking about life after a toxic relationship and what that can look like. We've spent so many years, so much time, so much effort and energy in something so toxic and so abusive. Why the hell are we still talking about it? We need to move on. We need to figure out why we got into something so bad, and then we need to figure out how to live after. And there is a way to live happy after something so toxic. I think it's one thing to share your story here and there to let other people know yeah, you're not alone, but at some point we have to let it go and we have to move on. But in order to do that, we have to heal. And healing after a toxic relationship is not easy. We have so many questions. We're so confused. We don't understand why so many things happened. So sometimes the last thing we're thinking about is dating. Other people will think about dating right away because they're like, well, if I'm not with somebody, then I'm not lovable, and this, that, the other thing. But the biggest mistake we make is jumping into something way too soon after something so abusive ends. So I'm here to talk more about the recovery and life after and kind of how that looks. I've walked down this path. I was the abuser in my marriage. I was then abused in my next relationship. And after I feel like I had two failed relationships, I was like, something needs to give. Like, what's wrong with me? Why is this happening? And when I got into recovery, I realized a lot. After recovery, after really learning how to heal and to deal with my past trauma, I wrote a book. I wrote a book about my story and how it was for me. So here it is now, Signs in the Rearview Mirror, leaving a toxic relationship behind. I pretty much opened myself up and told the world everything. How abusive I was, what it's like to be an abused man, what it's like to be in an abusive relationship, and more importantly, what's that like to get away from? Let's get away from this and really heal. I did write my second book, and that talks a little bit more about the recovery process and what that looks like. How painful that can be to look at yourself in the mirror and realize that you are at fault for some things, and then how to move on from it. So in my second book, I do talk about the recovery. I talk about dating when you're healthy, dating when you're not healthy. So obviously you have to date unhealthy first to date healthy. So I do talk about that. So this weekly series is going to be more of something that I can share my own experiences with, kind of guide people down a healthy path in dating. I'm a certified relationship coach. I've been helping people for a while now either leave something behind or get back into the dating scene after either a long-term relationship has ended or after a toxic relationship, and then people are just like, how do we do this? So I was the guinea pig for that, and I'm super excited about it. So after a toxic relationship, dating, what does that look like? That, to me, at first, I thought after recovery, after going to therapy and doing all this stuff and feeling like a much better, healthy human, I thought for some reason, I was going to wake up one day and everything that had happened to me was going to be a distant memory. It wasn't going to affect me. I can date now, I can do this, and I'm going to be totally healthy and nothing's going to bother me. Yeah, that could not have been further from the truth, because it's, I had taken about 5 years off from dating, and I was in recovery, threw myself into it to make sure I was ready for something. And I thought for sure it would be fine. But what happens is, it's almost like you learn how to swim, and then you don't swim for a long time, so you're like, oh, maybe I forgot how to swim, but then you jump back in, you're like, oh no, I can swim. So it's kind of like jumping back into something, and all of a sudden you're back where you started, and you have the unknown, where you don't know how this person's going to be. You don't know how what's going to set this person off, and you're learning someone else, and the only experience you have that you can really think of is the toxic relationship that you were in. So in a sense, you kind of expect everything to go the same way, so you have to go into it in increments. So throughout this series, I'm excited to talk to you guys about what that's really like how do you know you're dating healthy, which is what I'm going to talk about today. Like, how do you know that you're ready to date healthy? How do you know this is a good fit? How do you know the differences between flaws and red flags? What is that first breakup like? Because that's something that we don't ever think about. When we have gone through something so toxic and so abusive, and that breakup was so horrible that it drove you to do things you never thought you would do. When you meet someone and you realize it's not a good fit, you're terrified that that breakup is going to be the same way, that it's going to completely destroy you. So what is that first breakup like, and is that the reason we stay in something a little bit longer than we should? So there's so many moving parts to it. The firsts, you got all your firsts, your first date, your first kiss, the sex that you have the first time, like all of it, like what's that going to be like? Because you're so used to it being in one way that it's completely different, and you're not sure what to expect. Then you're meeting friends, you're meeting family. What is this going to be like? The first time you see him intoxicated, the first time you see her upset, the first time all of these things happen, like you tend to think back to what happened in your abusive relationship, and you're a little bit afraid of that. So as we move along, a lot of times we put these walls up because we're like, okay, what's going to happen with this? And we're a little bit nervous about that. I had my own experiences that I'll get into later on in this series with the first night the guy that I'm dating went out with his friends. Like, that doesn't sound like anything bad at all. But for me, that was really tough. So that's something, these are a lot of the things that we don't think about when we're dating. Like, how is this going to be? So I walked through this. I walked through this path, experienced all of it, and I'm excited to bring it to other people who are going through the same thing, because it's, again, something we don't really talk about. So after you get out of something, whether the guy or the girl left you, whether you left them or whatever, after you've gone no contact, because no contact is extremely important, after you have seen your therapist, after you've gone through a recovery program, and if you haven't gone through a recovery program, look into it, because it's something very necessary. I happened upon Celebrate Recovery. So that saved my life. I was able to go in there, be open, be honest, no judgments, figure out why I got into a toxic relationship, why I was the abuser, and why I stayed as long as I did. I was able to open doors of demons I had no idea I was even living with, which then led me to becoming a lot more healthy and a more available in a relationship when it was time. So I had to learn a lot about myself, and the most important thing was like, why? Why did I abuse? Why did I stay when I was being abused? And how do I change this? So I spent 5 years, and I'm still continuing with everything. I'm still seeing my therapist. I'm still hitting meetings. I'm still doing these things because it's necessary. It's not something that just ends. So after recovery, after doing a lot of, figuring out who I am, I spent a lot of time on my own. I spent a lot of time in the place I love to talk about, which is that space between no longer and not yet. What happens in that space is, in the beginning, it's dark, it's cold, you're alone, you're confused, you don't know what is going on because you've been through something so traumatic that was like a constant circus. And now that everything is gone, now that it's quiet, you're just like, wait, what happens now? As I spent time in that place, I learned who I was. I learned what I liked, what I didn't like. I traveled, I went out with my friends, I spent time with people. Most importantly, I rebuilt the relationships that were destroyed when I was in that toxic relationship. So I also became a certified relationship coach. I also started my podcast. I also wrote my book. I met a lot of new people. And then, of course, I dated too soon. I dated too soon. Made a lot of huge mistakes, but a lot of really good material came out of it as well. So it was an amazing place. So between no longer and not yet, that's the space where you figure out who you are. So you learn who you are. You learn likes, dislikes, all that stuff. So when you do meet that person who comes into your life, that person who makes you think, I think I might be ready to get out of this space. You can say to him or her, these are the things I like, these are the things I don't like. Because if we don't know who we are, what we need in our lives, how are we supposed to explain that to someone coming in? That's not going to work. So in that space, I learned a lot about myself, and I really, really love that space. I became very comfortable on my own. I was able to be the third wheel, the fifth wheel, the seventh wheel. I would go out for my birthday with my friends. I didn't have a guy I was dating. I didn't have a boyfriend, and I was totally okay with it because I was with my friends. I was totally fine traveling by myself. I was totally fine going to Halloween parties by myself. Totally fine dinner, movies, all of it by myself because I learned to fall in love with who I am. I learned to become a secure person who isn't going to wait around for someone to come in and say to me, are you ready to do this? Are you ready to do that? So in order to be ready to be in any kind of a relationship, I had to be alone first. And I loved it. I spent, not to shock anyone, but Valentine's Day alone. Oh no. And look at, the world is still standing. It's not the worst thing to ever happen to you. I woke up on Christmas morning to a house where there was nobody there. And that was the best Christmas I've ever had in my entire life. Sorry, kids, but it was amazing. I found so much freedom and so much independence in making my own decisions and learning how to make my own decisions. But getting to this place wasn't easy. I would scream and cry out the evil demons that I had inside me. How I became the person I was, I had to face that. I had to grieve the loss of a mom that is still alive but doesn't love me. That's not easy. You can't do that and date at the same time. There's no way, because that's not fair to do to someone. You have to get through a lot of your stuff before you can bring someone in to enjoy your life, because you want to enjoy your life with somebody. You don't want to struggle with them. Obviously, if you're married first and you do all this stuff, whatever, that's fine. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying this is my story and what happened with me. So after enjoying the space between no longer and not yet, I would talk to my therapist about stuff. And he's just like, when are you going to date? And I'm like, no, that's not happening. I'm good. I wasn't ready. I felt like I wasn't ready. And he's like, you're ready to do this. And I didn't think I was. So for me, what happened was I started to go onto dating websites. This is after. So before, when my toxic relationship was still kind of ending, I would force myself out there to go on dates, and that was just nightmarish. Lots of those dates will come up in this series. I wrote about the dates in my next book, how that looked, picking up on red flags, etc., etc. But the most important thing I kind of want to talk about right now is like when you're ready. Like, how do you know you're ready to date? The answer is you don't know. It's the same way you figure out if you like sushi or not. You gotta try it, right? So, and I love to tell people I don't like sushi. I've never tried it. So I didn't know what was on the other side of dating. In my mind, it was pain, suffering. I'm gonna get hurt. I'm gonna get lied to. I'm gonna get hit. I'm gonna get cheated on. I'm gonna be called names. I'm gonna be tricked. So these are the things that I was thinking. So if you're thinking these are the things that are gonna happen, why would you do it? So working with my therapist, I would work with him at first twice a week, and then we went to once a week, and then we went to every 2 weeks, and now we're at 1 month. Every month I go in and see my therapist, and he loves to listen to The Kelly Show. So at one point he was like, it's time for you to really start thinking about it. He's like, you need to get out there and get some experience with dating. So when I first started dating unhealthy, I made all the mistakes. The first mistake I made was dating too soon. Like, I wasn't ready to do it. So the first time I went on a date after the toxic relationship ended, it was a nightmarish. It was a complete nightmarish. I wasn't ready. I was missing my ex, or I thought I was missing my ex. I couldn't give everything I was supposed to give on a first date. It ended up with me having to call the sheriff because the guy was like, oh, I'm just not going to let you walk out of my life. Lots of red flags I could have seen before if my eyes were open, if I wasn't focused on trying to please society and not myself, if I was strong enough to say, you know what, I'm not ready to date, and just not date. But because my ex was with somebody and I didn't want to be alone, I was like, I need to date. So I had a few dates where it was like I'm gonna try to do that. And every date ended in some kind of calamity where I wasn't ready. I didn't pay attention to the red flags. I didn't see them. I didn't see that it wasn't gonna be a good fit. I was just so focused on finding someone that I threw myself into situations I should have never been in. So that's how, one of the signs you're not ready is when you go on a date and all you're thinking about is your ex. If you're on a date with somebody and you're just thinking about your ex, you are not ready to date. If you just broke up with somebody 3 weeks ago, you're not ready to date. You're just not. So you can sit there and you can be over the person that you were in a relationship with. I'm over the guy, I'm over the girl. Absolutely. But are you over the stuff that happened within that relationship? That's the big question, because there was a lot of trauma that happens during a toxic relationship, even in regular relationships, like healthy relationships. There's stuff that happens that will affect you. So you've got to make sure you give yourself enough time to heal and really work through it. But again, society teaches us that if we are single, we are not lovable. And that's not the case. If you learn to love yourself first, then you won't care what society says. You're only going to care about what you want and what's good for you and what's healthy for you. So one of the first signs that you're not ready is that the time hasn't gone by. You're still thinking about your ex and you're just not over it. It's not okay to go out and do that, because you're going to not only destroy parts of yourself because you're putting yourself through unnecessary misery, but the person that you're on a date with is, maybe he's ready or she's ready, maybe they're not, who knows what you're walking into. But the fact that you're selfish enough to go out and bring someone else into this isn't right. So if you feel like you're not ready, stay off the apps, even if you're just looking. If you feel like you're not ready, don't entertain anyone. If you feel like you want to go out and have a booty call, do it. But make sure that person understands that's what that is. But as far as like dating goes, be careful with what you're doing, because it's selfish to know you're not ready and bring someone else into it. But some of the signs that you are ready is when, say, seeing a picture of your ex doesn't bother you anymore. Well, yeah, maybe you're ready to go out. Maybe talking about it and you're not so upset about it and you're not angry anymore when you've worked through a lot of the stuff that happened within that relationship. So when I knew I never really knew I was ready to date until my therapist was like, okay, it's time for you to start doing this. So what he did with me was, he gave me a quota, because at one point I went in and he's like, how's the dating? I'm like, oh, it's great. I'm like averaging, like I'm talking like 4 guys. And he's like, a week? And I'm like, no, a month. And he's like, what? He's like, you need to pick that up. Not because he wanted me to go out with these people, not because he wanted me to actually like go out and date them and stuff like that, but to get more comfortable with it, to recognize the signs, to say, okay, this is good and this is not good. So at one point I agreed. I was like, okay, I'll do that. I'll see how that goes. Because what I was doing was, I was talking to people. Sometimes they would ghost. Sometimes it wasn't a good fit. I would go out with somebody and I would realize at that point, okay, hey, this isn't the right guy for me. I wasn't feeling anxious. I wasn't feeling stressed out. I was feeling like, okay, let me just try this. So my therapist was concerned I wasn't putting myself out there enough to like actually meet someone. So I agreed. And I said, whatever, I'll do this. This sounds miserable, but I'll do this. And then I did. And I started talking to more people and I started to learn like why he wanted me to do that. It was because the more people you talk to, the more experience you get and the more comfortable you are with saying, no, thank you. I went out with somebody, the first meeting was amazing. It was great. It seemed like there was a connection. But then I noticed like on the first date, he started doing like a lot of impressions all the time. And I was like, oh no, this dude's like making impressions, like doing impressions like then I was like, maybe it's not so bad. And then I went out with him a second time and it didn't stop. And I was like, oh yeah, this is not good. And he wasn't a bad guy. He was good looking. He was a smart guy. He seemed really nice. He seemed really open. He was like a touchy sort of like nice, like whatever. Like he seemed like he would be the kind of guy who would be a little bit emotional and like kind of take care of your needs a little bit. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. But he kept making these horrible impressions because he wanted to be a comedian. Oh, I couldn't do it. So I was like, no. dude, this isn't gonna work. And it wasn't because he was evil or mean, because I thought he was gonna hit me or he swore at me and all those things I thought would happen. It was because he constantly did impressions, and I hope he's not watching this right now. But after that, I got to be a little, when you tell the first person, I'm not interested, this probably won't work, it gets a lot easier. It's a lot easier to say that to someone. Sometimes it's a little more difficult, and you do end up ghosting. I linked with a guy, never met up with him. His pictures looked great, but we were texting, and within the first 8 hours, he was like, what do you think about marriage, and blah, blah, blah. Not like, hey, where do you stand on marriage? You think you'll ever do it? But when do you think we can get married? And I'm like, dude, you don't even know what I look like in human form. You have no idea who I am. And then he kept saying I think this is going to be good. I think we're going to make it. So at that point, I stopped responding. And then he was a little anxious, and he sent me a text, and he's like, ha ha ha, did I lose you already? Yeah, psycho, you kind of did. I'm not getting married to you anytime soon. But I never responded. So yeah, that wasn't the greatest thing, but I've been ghosted too. So I think it's when you just go out there and do it, and you take your time, and you take a step back, and you let it happen instead of forcing it to happen, you start to see people kind of for who they are and not who you want them to be. Like the guy who was doing the impressions, I really thought about it, and I was like, could I live my life with a guy who's always trying to be funny? No. Now, how do you tell someone, hey man, I really like you, but your impressions are shit? You don't. It's not worth it. We had 2 dates. It really wasn't there because of the impressions. And I was able to say, you know what, this really isn't what I want, which was super brave of me. That's not easy to do. Because you don't know how people will react. You don't know if they're going to get upset. Because after a toxic relationship, especially with somebody who was abusive, you don't know what the reaction's going to be. You're kind of waiting. And you're waiting for someone to blow up on you and start calling you names and scream at you. But he was like, hey, I understand. Thanks for telling me. I was like, oh, not everyone's going to go psycho on me. Okay. But you still are a little afraid of that. You're still a little afraid. So from there, I just kind of started talking to people. But then when my therapist suggested I talk to more people, I was like, all right. So I did. And when he suggested it, I think I had a few dates with some guys. And when I went out with somebody who made me feel really uncomfortable, good looking guy, super smart, good career, all this stuff. We had a great connection the first night, but then wanted to go home with me that night. That's not what I do. So I said, no, I'm not going home with you. A few days later, he basically was, upset, felt like I rejected him, this, that, the other thing, and suggested that I meet up with him to sleep with him because he feels like he missed out on sleeping with me. But then told me right before that he was about to get into a relationship and he needed to do this before he started a relationship. What? No. So if you're able to tell someone sort of, get bent, you get stronger. The more you do this, the stronger you get. But you have to make sure when you start dating that you realize that you're not going to meet the man of your dreams on the first date. You're probably going to have to go through some stuff. You're going to have to learn a lot of lessons. And then when the right person comes in, when the right person scoops in and wants to, be a little bit more with you, you're a little bit more prepared for it. You know how to stand up for yourself. You know how to say different things. Every relationship is different. Every beginning is different. So just because yours doesn't look like your friends doesn't make it wrong. You have to really go with what you want, not with what other people want. So I had a lot of really insane dates, but how I knew I was ready to actually date is by dating. Is by really feeling like, okay, I'm going to try this. I tried it at one point and I was wrong. I wasn't ready to date. So I took more time off, got more help, healed a lot more, figured out a lot more stuff, enjoyed my time by myself more, went out more, enjoyed my friends more, saw my family more, traveled a little bit more until I felt a little bit more ready. And my therapist was like, yeah, I think you're ready for this. I didn't think I was. But then it happened. Then I met someone. And it was amazing, actually. It was a really good thing. There's obviously more on that, but that's not for today's episode, but there's definitely more on that. So that's how I knew I was ready, by actually doing it, by healing, feeling ready. I tried it at one point, didn't work. I wasn't ready. I acknowledged I wasn't ready, and then became okay with spending time on my own. So dating after a toxic relationship is not easy. It can be really, really complicated, and you got to take it in increments. You got to take it in steps. So that was today's episode of How Do You Know You're Ready? You may try it and find you're not ready, but then you may try it again and find that you are ready. But you may continue trying it and find, you know what, I'm not ready. Until you are. But just keep trying and keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and try not to overthink it first or at all, and just see how that goes. So I'm super excited about today's episode. Thank you for joining me. If you have any questions or commentary or anything like that, please leave the messages for me in the comments. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Check out my podcast, Let's Get Wiki Deep. My book, Signs in the Rearview Mirror, Leaving a Toxic Relationship Behind. And follow me on social media. Kelly Smith Author is my handle for pretty much everything. So be sure to tune in, though, next week, next Thursday, for the next episode.